So welcome, everybody. Very warm welcome to all of you. We're very excited that so many of you could join us for today's event with Thomas Hübl on integrating the spiritual dimension in trauma healing, the power of spirituality as a resource for healing individual, ancestral, and collective trauma. My name is Robin Alfred. You may recognize me as one of the hosts from the Collective Trauma Summit and various other online sessions and events that Thomas has been running over the last few years. And I'm happy to be here co-hosting this event today with Anna Molitor. Anna has also been a host in the Collective Trauma Summit. She's been our poetry curator and has also been an assistant in Thomas's programs for many years. And Anna will be with us a bit later on during the Q&A part of our call. So a few technical announcements before we get started. Closed captions are available for this event. For those of you joining us on Zoom, you can turn on closed captions by clicking the CC button found at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't see it, click More, and you'll find options there. If you're finding us on YouTube, I'm afraid the closed captions cannot be turned off. If you have any technical issues or questions, please email our support team at onlinecoursesupport@thomashubl.com. Those of you who are here with us on the Zoom call can submit a written question at any time by clicking on the Q&A button found at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't see it, again, select More, and you'll find the Q&A button there. Of course, we know that there's a large number of people on the call, so we will be looking at all your questions and hope to bear them in mind, if not in today's call, then through the upcoming 5-month course that we'll also be talking about. We've had many people reaching out and wanting to go deeper into the healing of collective trauma. And in response to that, Thomas will be offering a 5-month online intensive called The Spiritual Healing Journey, Revitalizing Your Roots and Connecting to the Soul of Humanity. Enrollment for that has just opened. And if you think you may be interested, you can check your email after the event today for more information. Or if you're watching the replay, you can click the link on this page to find out more. That course starts in mid-November. It will include live online sessions, breakout groups, mentoring groups, and guest speakers, and access to foundational teachings by Thomas on collective trauma. It very much builds on previous trainings and classes that Thomas has been running, and it's also fine to be joining for the first time now. We will be giving you a lot of backup information to onboard you with. And so we invite you to explore whether this might be a good fit for you at this time in your own personal and professional development. For those of you who are new to Thomas and his work, here's a brief introduction. Thomas Hübl is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator who works within the complexity of systems and cultural change, integrating the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science, which we sometimes call the marriage of inner and outer science. Since the early 2000s, he has led large-scale events and courses on the healing of collective trauma. He's also an author. His recent book is called Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. He's also the author of a book called Healing Collective Trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds. He has served as an advisor and guest faculty for universities and organizations, also as a coach for CEOs and organizational leaders, and he's currently a visiting scholar at Harvard University. So very warm welcome to you, Thomas. And maybe I could just start by asking you to provide some context about why you think it's important at this time to look at the spiritual dimension in trauma healing.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Robin. It's good to be here with you and with everybody, also Anna, and everybody who is tuning in right now. Yes, I think we are seeing that spirituality, or the experience of a bigger context that we are part of, especially in a hyper-individualized world, at least in some parts of the world, we put a lot of emphasis on the individual, but actually that individual, that all of us are part of a bigger system that we call life, is very important. And sometimes the isolation that we experience, especially as a trauma symptom, we feel more isolated, we feel more kind of separate sometimes. And that level of separation is actually often part of the suffering, why we can't really heal together. And one dimension is the relational dimension. So how do we practice in a way, our contemplative practice, I often say mystics in the marketplace or becoming a social mystic, because many of us that are listening now are not sitting in a monastery or in a cave in the Himalayan mountain, most probably if it's not a 5-star cave. So then we are embedded in the society, and we are often embedded in difficult situations. We are embedded in jobs. We are embedded in dealing with the current fragmentation in many democracies in the world. So we need to be resourced and resilient to be in this time with many crises that we see right now. And I think relational competencies, like turning relating into a contemplative practice, is for sure one aspect of it. Being grounded in our ancestry, that's why we did last year the ancestral healing course, because we know and think science is showing more and more, but we know from many indigenous and ancient traditions how important ancestral healing is. It's not something new that we are coming up with. That knowledge is around for a very long time. And so that's part of our spiritual context as well. It's the ancestral dimension, and we will talk about this also in the course in depth. There is the collective dimension of trauma that has trauma symptoms, but also as a spiritual component. And there is, of course, the spiritual dimension, which is the expansion of our consciousness, being able to increase our perspectives on life, having a bigger and bigger perspective, embodying that bigger perspective, which we call wisdom, and being able to walk that wisdom, which is called walk your talk. And so, can we walk our talk, or do we have spiritual concepts that become kind of a spiritual bypass? Or can we embody like the spiritual dimension, and then it becomes actually a great resource, becomes a resource that gives us power and creativity. It becomes a resource that we call innovation, and it becomes a resource that we call inner strength, courage, compassion. It's a way how to stay in a space that is more open, also in challenging moments. And I think if we see events currently developing in the world, we need more of that. And we need to stay spacious and grounded in challenging situations. And so I think all of that is important when we talk about the spiritual dimension. And another aspect is for sure that the violation of human rights. I often say the right to be in life, living. Everybody who has been born has the right to be in life. The right to become, to flourish, to express their intelligence, and that we support each other in expressing our intelligence, and the right to belong to healthy communities and relational networks. These are very important aspects of what it means to be a human being. And when that gets hurt, when one of these rights gets hurt, trauma is being inflicted. So we can say there's trauma through natural catastrophes, but if we face it, most of the trauma in the world has been inflicted by humans onto humans. And so I believe, and I have seen over 20 plus years, that on a very deep level, even if we deal with PTSD or with other trauma symptoms, underneath is always like an ethical restoration that restores the relational system and the self-healing mechanism of life so that we can really heal. But when we heal, the ecosystem that we are, and I'm saying this consciously because I believe I would challenge the notion that we are part of an ecosystem, but that actually we are the ecosystem. And the very notion that we are part of it means when we walk through the forest, where is nature? Is nature around us? Or am I also nature? Of course, I'm also nature. My body is biological system. I'm nature. You are nature. We are nature. All of us are nature. So nature is not just around us. Nature is all over. And the same is with society. We see through the speed of data that a big world becomes a global village. We all come very close together through the information technology that's around. And society and global society is not just around us, it is us. We are also society. And that kind of split that we are on the planet versus we are the planet, we are part of society or we are also society, all of us, there's a certain dualism that's included in that. And I think that's part of why we need to ethically restore our wounds. We need to integrate the trauma symptoms, or the trauma that's stored in our bodies, emotions, nervous systems, relationships, and heal the spiritual dimension of it. And that opens up the data flow of the entire system so that we get a feeling of literally being integrally connected. Or as a friend of ours says, the Dan Siegel, intra-connected is a great word that describes that. And so that interdependence of the individual and the whole, individual and the collective, I think is a very important power. And that's also a very important spiritual healing principle. And so I think in the course, we will also explore what are these healing principles that are around for thousands of years and find new languages and new marketplaces to be explored, but are actually very wise. And of course, then there is the dimension of spiritual trauma, which means trauma that has been inflicted in spiritual or religious communities, and that hurts kind of a deep part of our inner GPS and inner connectedness. So that's another part where spiritual traumatization is important to examine. And yeah, and I think also for everybody who works with clients in any way, like including the spiritual dimension as a deep resource and not supporting the bypassing into a spiritual practice, but that the spiritual practice becomes a resource for my healing process is very, very powerful. And so all these dimensions together, I would say, from nature, ancestors, bigger systems that we are part of, all the levels of relationships, and of course the deep spiritual or transpersonal or transcendental dimension, they are all very important resources for how we heal ourselves. And I think especially in this time, we see how much healing we really need in order to stop the repetition compulsion of atrocities and trauma all around the world. So I would say, let's bring that in and also see the pendulum of what because I believe the science of trauma and the mystical science, they are having a very powerful dialogue at the moment. And there's kind of a renaissance of spirituality around the world. There's so many people that are engaging in any, whatever, different kinds of spiritual practices, contemplative practices. And so there's a very powerful resource at the moment, like an awakening around the world, that is not just bound to a specific religion. It can be within a religion, of course, and it can also be non-denominational. And so that's a very powerful process that I think can give us a lot of resource to do the collective healing work around the world that I believe we have to do. Maybe we leave it here, that we can also have some space for questions that came in. There are so many questions that came in, so maybe Anna, you can guide us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Thomas. I'm also really excited for this course. This is so powerful in our community when we start looking at this more specifically. So yeah, we had over 400 questions come in. So we're just kind of pulling some of the themes, and those of you who are sending questions now, looking at those. And maybe, Thomas, if you want to start, you've been speaking about this, but maybe to be even more precise about, a lot of questions came in, Rose, saying, how do you define spirituality? Nasita, what is spirituality and what is soul? And then also Sarah asked, how do we, well, there's two more. How do we know when we're in our spiritual self versus our emotional self is one. But also, and Doris asked, can you define spirituality and distinguish it from religion? What's the distinction here between spirituality and religion?
Yeah, when we look at, so spirituality, or at least as I look at it, is that I am aware that I am part of a bigger context, and that bigger context is not just an idea in my mind, but that is something that I can begin to feel, that I can feel part of, which has horizontal dimensions that are relational, which has vertical dimensions from where we come from and where we go to. And it's the capacity to have a powerful practice to expand our current level of consciousness, our current perspective onto life, and find deeper or more encompassing perspectives or states of consciousness that give more space to who I am, what the world is, and reframes my existence in life, and grounds me deeper in a deeper state of presence, maybe. And so this expansion, we have thousands of years of what I would call professional practice, people that spend their whole life exploring mystical teachings. And those are alive in traditions that are around for thousands of years, but they are also alive in people that feel deeply called to practice. And many of us that already feel a call, and I think many of us that are here right now feel a call that is strong enough to explore our spiritual calling and follow it. But in the place, and everybody can look also, in the place that I feel a spiritual calling, there is something we know, even if it's not a rational knowing, but we are following some kind of pull, we are following something that calls us, and from a certain stage of our practice actually makes it impossible not to practice, because it becomes such a powerful drive in our life. And in that inner space that knows something, I think there is a place where we are all deeply connected, and where we are already connected to a strong spiritual power or force or presence or space in us. And so we are not starting from scratch. Once we feel a call, we are already connected to that spiritual dimension. And when we bring some powerful practices into our life, it can have a tremendously transforming and powerful impact. Of course, some of it needs to be guided, and we need to look at it. For some people, it's also an easy way to exit. Maybe talk later a bit about spiritual bypassing. And but the level of presence and the level of groundedness and connectedness and depth it gives us also a deeper knowing of our own GPS in life and how we go through different phases in our life of our own evolution, and also the courage and the resilience that it gives us to skillfully face the pain or face the traumatizations of our individual, ancestral, or collective nature. As I said, skillfully, which means in a way that is appropriate, that we can integrate, is very strong. And I would also say it's truly practicing that we got the power through our consciousness to disarm, in a way, the repetition compulsion of trauma that Sigmund Freud already spoke about. The cycle of re-traumatization and the cyclic symptoms that we experience individually, ancestrally, and collectively. And that we have the power to reduce the echo of intergenerational trauma so that our children can walk, and the next generations can walk into a bigger and healthier world. And I think that's also very powerful, that I often call this the responsibility, the ability to respond to the future generations. We often talk about sustainability. Sustainability means that I integrate the traumatic stress and the traumatic symptoms in my life enough that I can live like a sustainable life in myself that is physically, emotionally, mentally, relationally sustainable, which means it regenerates itself and I don't burn my resources. I actually regenerate my resources as I live my life. Even if I live a very intense life, and especially if we live very intense lives, we need to have a very strong practice to do that sustainably so that we can still, after decades, enjoy what we are doing, what our purpose is calling us to. And a lot of trauma stress actually, over years, exhausts our resources. And it burns our bodies, that ends up in physical health issues, mental health issues, but also physical health issues. It has relational components, so it hurts relationships, and we create non-sustainable relationships. And it sometimes creates like a disconnect in us from the part of us that is more essential, that is more connected to a deeper interconnectedness of life. And one part of that we could call our soul, but it's that we feel deeply connected to what's essential in us. And that essential dimension is key. The other aspect for sure is that we, our deep purpose in life is sometimes, especially in the Western career path, purpose has become career. But purpose in the mystical sense is that I understand that the issues and maybe the traumas that we have been born into individually, ancestrally, that we kind of inherited through our ancestors or the collective societies that we grew up in or were born into, they're not blocking our path, but they are actually also our path and our purpose. So to heal the dimension that we have been born into is as much our purpose as is the expression and the service. Because when we connect to a deeper spiritual source in our life, we feel that our capacity to be generous grows. Because we feel more connected to life, we feel more what's the power that life channels through us. And I'm saying channeling because that intelligence flows through us. And there are many studies that say when we feel we can give something, we feel happier. Yeah, but that's a deep mystical principle because information, data, energy needs to flow. When it flows, it doesn't belong to me. I'm not holding on to it. The more I let it pass through, the more I receive. So spiritual practice gives us more resource to be generous. And in crisis or healing situations, we need generosity. Crisis is defined by the scarcity that a certain system or context expresses in that moment. And what it needs is a certain level of generosity and giving. And that giving is a remedy that can turn the crisis into a creative growth moment, individually and collectively. And so I think that's why having a deep anchor in how life is pulsing through us every moment and feeling the interconnectedness. And I think one of the more pandemic symptoms today is isolation, very strong levels of polarization, or feeling separate, feeling not related sometimes. I think one of the remedies is, of course, community and the spiritual dimension. Yeah, maybe we'll leave it here for now. There's so much more to say, obviously, but we don't have so much time today.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's resonating so deeply what you're saying about having this anchor and how it allows us to stay here and be here with a gift in these times as well. So yeah, it's beautiful. And maybe we've had a lot of great questions come in about spiritual bypassing, actually, and some people just asking, let's see, like Rachel was just saying, like, how does a person know if they're spiritually bypassing? And Sagar and Sigrun also asked you if you could give kind of examples of spiritual bypassing, how we detect that in ourselves and in our clients. And then I want to bring another question that came. It's also like, how do you distinguish that bypassing from true spiritual healing? And someone also, Keith, addressed that many trauma therapies bypass the spiritual and many spiritual approaches bypass the trauma in people's lives. So what are the principles that help us ground more in like the distinction there of true healing, true resilience, true connection, rather than kind of going out and numbing something or going above something?
Yeah, let's look at something. In the traumatic moment, when somebody goes through a very painful, overloading moment, life says, here in space and time, it's not good for me. I think that's a very important information. Here in space and time, it's not good for me. When somebody goes through an abuse, has a life-threatening experience, is all kinds of situations that are really traumatizing. Not being here, not being embodied, not feeling the overwhelm of stress and emotions, not feeling the adversity of the relational context we are in, is deeply intelligent. Life learned that over thousands and tens of thousands of years to survive better. And our DNA and our nervous systems carry that intelligence. It doesn't mean that when that stays locked and untreated, that we continue experiencing that as benefits, of course. But the process itself fragments space-time. So not here and not now is better than here and now, because it's so overloading. And so when we talk about presence, because in the spiritual dimension, but also in the treatment dimension of trauma, as therapists, as however we work, or when coaches work with clients, or mediators in conflict situations, to be present, of course, is a very powerful part and a necessary part to at all be able to open up a healing space. Now, many people struggle to be more present. Why? Because we often don't understand that not being present is not a problem or shortcoming. It was and is locked an intelligence in our system that we need to work with, then work against. Same as many of our defense mechanisms are intelligent functions. They serve the purpose. They are not just weaknesses or shortcomings. And of course, we need to address them, and we need to support their integration, their digestion and their integration. But the way we approach it is crucial. So sometimes when we get too much aligned with not here, not now, we are hanging out in the promise of the spiritual practice. Somewhere there is this kind of paradise, there is the great state, there is the great whatever, enlightenment, that will ease all my suffering. And if that becomes the carrot that I'm continuously going after, then I might stay addicted to not here, to not now. And it doesn't support me to ground myself again in here and now, that healing myself to be able to be here and now and participate in this world as it is, not in this world where many of the unconscious people trigger me all the time and where I cannot be without X, Y, Z. That's a sign of spiritual bypassing. That's sometimes important if I know that that's part of my healing phase. But if it becomes part of my spiritual definition, I think then we need to look at it. So practices that establish nice and great feeling states and disintegrate again into the difficulty of our daily life, that's not a sustainable practice. And I think it's a misunderstanding of the spiritual practice. But a spiritual practice that helps me to embody myself more, in a way we could say incarnate more, be more in and of life, and at the same time transcend my life more and be able to touch deeper states of consciousness that many big wisdom traditions talk about. Not only talk about, live. And I think that leads to the fact that, like at the beginning of the Bible, when let there be light, like when light, creation itself is light, doesn't talk about light. So when the word, when what we say and what we carry inside, what we experience, is congruent on many, many levels. I think that's the authenticity, the realness, the humility to really walk our path and walk our talk. And it also shows a little bit, when we hear in many communities, and people say, oh, I still have that pattern. And I bring this sentence as an example because I often ask, why still? It means you shouldn't have it? Or what does still mean? It's almost done. I know already about it, but it's still in my life. But this still says a lot. It says it's hard for me to be here. It's hard for me to own my life. It's hard for me to walk where I am. I would like to be already more developed, further ahead, whatever that means. But these are all signs that being present is difficult. And it is. In many situations, it is also difficult to live in a world where a lot of atrocities are happening. It's not easy. And I think facing that, and also facing that we are living in a world where there is again and again hurt and traumatization, but to be able to be in that with more and more presence, that's a very powerful healing. But that means also that every spiritual practice is a deep embodiment of our humanity. That's why I often say our deepest humanity is our highest possibility. They are not two. And as long as spiritual practice keeps them as two, there is some bypassing involved.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, that's great. And maybe just to say a little, you're kind of addressing this a little bit, but Jen brings a question. Like, can you articulate how you envision an on-the-ground implementation of spiritual connection in social justice movements or in times of this kind of social warfare? How can we incorporate the spiritual dimension again without bypassing in that kind of deep relatedness to what's happening in the world? Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think one very important part is that we have seen that missionary movements, like trying to convince other people of one's own faith, creates pain. Being a living example of walking our path authentically might inspire other people, but it's not that anybody should or be more conscious or more something than they choose to be. And I think that in itself for social justice movements is very important, because that means that we bow down to each other, we learn from each other, we learn from each other's faith, spiritual practices, and we learn from each other's experiences. And then the more we embody our own spiritual practice, maybe that's of help to others and maybe that's inspirational. But there's sometimes a notion, even in more non-denominational spiritual practices, that that's really good to have. And it might be good to have, but maybe also not. And I think that's very important to keep open. So because there often it starts. The second thing is, I think for every one of us, and that's also what we want to look at in the course, is to own our own transgressions is a very important practice. And it can be small things in our life, it can be ancestral aspects, it can be whatever it is, like that we create a relationship and that we are willing to own our own transgressions or the transgressions of the systems that we are part of is very important also. That doesn't mean that some people really experience a lot of trauma, and for them it's important to deal with that now. So it's not always everybody needs to do the same thing at the same time, but to re-own, because the story of he blames her and she blames the snake is defining a lot of what we see in humanity. So I think being able to re-own our own parts in situations is important. And this can be when we hurt somebody verbally in a conversation, up to many things, up to national things. So I think it's very important to develop practices for them. And the other part is, like, sometimes a very simple spiritual practice starts with creating space. I think in many moments, it doesn't matter if that's conflict resolution, if that's mediation of other parts, if that's trauma healing, if that's kind of living a more spiritual life, being able to bring space, inner space, slowing down, being able to reflect on our lives, being able to digest part of our experience and integrate it as what we often call post-traumatic learning. But the dimension of space in itself is already like a contemplative skill. And the more space we can bring into our own inner world, the more we can bring into our organizations, into our teams, into our families, into our societies. So like that inner space is not only in me, it's going to affect everybody that I'm in touch with. Same as traumatic stress has a kind of a viral tendency. If somebody is very stressed, it can trigger the stress in other people, and then whole systems become very stressed. But the opposite is also true. Spaciousness is contagious too. And I think the more people we have that can bring space into tight situations, that's an incredible resource. And so so that's important, and also that we are willing to learn from each other. Like that we are willing to really listen to each other and learn from each other about each other's backgrounds and contexts and social justice movements. I think that data flow, that horizontal data flow, is, I think, also a strong practice, especially when there are more collective traumas involved in social justice spaces. I think these are all important qualities, and all of that increases my resilience and my capacity to stay present when times are more difficult. Yeah. As I said, there's so much more to every question. Every question can be a module of our course.
Right. Yeah. Great. So we're going to transition in a minute to talking more specifically with Robin about the course itself, but maybe to answer something about many people will be here maybe for the course or in this question for themselves personally, but also for those of us that work with clients. There's a lot of questions coming in, maybe just your own perspective that you teach so beautifully about how we can bring this into our work as therapists. But also there's some specific questions like how do I address this when someone with a client who might not have an idea of the soul, or am I in the therapy session, would the therapist just hold the spiritual understanding of the trauma, or would they be sharing more with the client and introducing the concept? How do you see this with client work, what it can offer?
Yeah, what I have seen over many years is the more we embody our own spirituality, it is already a tremendous resource for the spaces individually or in group work or when we work on collective issues. So it's not just if my clients have a spiritual practice, talk about spirituality at all or not. That's not really the point. Because if I feel there is an opening, and often when there is trauma integration, the experience of what do we see in the healing moment of trauma, that one aspect starts to open up the holding and grounds itself more, creates more earth, creates more grounding, creates more stability, creates more connectedness to where we come from, opens up the base, regulates the nervous system differently, and. So there are many exhaling qualities, I would say. But then there is one aspect that creates kind of a vertical upward movement, means the energy that was trapped in the frozenness of the trauma releases. It moves upwards, the central nervous system, and it moves upwards into our mature perspective. So it increases my mature perspective onto life, and it might open me up to a deeper sense of something greater or more interconnectedness with life. So it might be that through the process of healing, suddenly I will feel a deeper calling also to a spiritual dimension or for a spiritual quality in my life. Other clients come with a strong spiritual practice, but with a lack of embodiment. So sometimes also not just saying, okay, the transcendental part is very important, but for some people, that's already part of their life. What they need is to let go of that a bit, that the embodiment can ground itself. So that we can, because sometimes the spirituality became the only resource in very adverse situations. So coming back into the embodiment is actually challenging, because some people might be very scared that they're losing their spiritual connection when they come more into embodiment. And so there's a whole spectrum, and there are many things that I cannot say now. That it's like a very big topic, and we cannot talk sufficiently in 1 hour about all of these questions. But just to give a taste a bit, the thing is, though, my own groundedness and anchor, and I explore my, as we call it, that's why we did already like an individual, ancestral, collective trauma healing journey. And now we are adding the spiritual dimension after, every fall we have a big online course. And when I'm grounded in this individual, ancestral, collective nervous system or self, and I'm also connected or grounded in my own spirituality, then my bandwidth of meeting my clients is simply much bigger, because I can resonate with them on all these different levels. So there is the personal development level and the whole attachment development and of a mature perspective, but there's also an ancestral keyboard, and there's a collective keyboard, and there's a spiritual keyboard. So the keyboard, the variety of tunes is becoming bigger. And also my capacity to see my client's spirituality or feel it, to see and feel my client's ancestors or their collective trauma involvement grows. So my capacity to open my own internal capacities of sensing, sense-making, and providing a bigger space as somebody who leads clients or groups through processes, I'm simply becoming a much bigger holding space. And that gives me more systemic sensing. Systemic sensing can be attunement to a person, an ancestral system, a collective system, a spiritual dimension. And so the more kind of openness I established in myself, I'm simply like a resonance board for more and more clients that bring various topics with themselves to be met in what they need. And I think that's very powerful. So the spectrum, the range grows, but that's, of course, that's also true for everybody else that's not working with clients. My capacity to participate in life in a much richer, much deeper, more profound level is growing. And that, as many wisdom traditions or mystical traditions say, a deeper connectedness is a deeper connectedness to a very profound intelligence. And the deep stillness in our beings, that's not just the absence of noise or thinking. The deep stillness of our deepest beings is bathing in a tremendously intelligent, in a tremendous intelligence, let's keep it that way. And So that also means the more we are grounded in it, it shows up in us as inspiration, as insight, as deeper understanding, as innovation, and like a deeper sense of knowing that goes beyond our rational knowing, our rational learned knowledge. And so I think also in the client work, but in every kind of profession, or just in our own deeper sense making of life, there's a very deep spiritual root that can add a lot of value to how we show up in life, moment to moment to moment. And I think that's a beautiful dimension also to mention, because sometimes it looks like spaciousness and stillness are just functions of calm or tranquility, but it's way, way beyond that. And I think many practitioners experience that the more they practice, many insights come in and a much deeper understanding of life, and that many aspects of life make more sense, like spirit, cognition, sensing is sense making, and that's what we call alignment.
Thank you, Thomas. I get very excited about this conversation. Also, just affirming 100% what you're saying in my own experience. And I think one other thing I would say is, like, people often say, do you become exhausted working with trauma? Or, is it like really heavy? And I think when we're connected in this way, it's like the session becomes often like a space of a miracle, or like you're living in the stream of what's coming through. And it's also nourishing as it comes through. I think that's something also to feel as we're deeper and deeper in the trauma work and in the trauma in the world, that this connection opens something very profound.
Yeah, I want to underline what you just said. I've been working with very intense collective trauma fields more than 20 years. And for sure, my deep spiritual practice is the charger of my battery. And so that it's not exhausting and that we can go into very painful collective layers all around the world. I think that what you just said is for sure the basis for me to be able to do that. And so, yeah, underline what you just said.
Yeah, great. So, I'll transition now, Robin. I think you're going to come in and guide a little bit more about the course that's coming up. Thank you so much for all of that, Thomas.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thomas, was a great exchange there. And I also just want to amplify what you were both talking about. Also in my experience working as a person who does what I would call depth coaching, like to not include the spiritual dimension feels inconceivable now, both in myself and also in what I'm tuning into in the client. And then a bigger field emerges within which insights can arise and healing movements occur. So I'm very excited about the course on many different levels, also on a personal developmental level for everybody too. And we just have a little time to talk a bit about the structure of the course, because you've already spoken about how it builds on previous courses. So we're part of a process of building a collective healing movement, and maybe you want to speak a little bit more to that. But also some questions have come in about, is it interactive? Is it a lot of theory? Will I get to practice anything? And I know we have a kind of architecture within the course that supports interactive experience. So maybe you could speak to those dimensions too.
Yeah, it has all of it. We will look into individual, ancestral, collective, and spiritual trauma and its healing process. We will look deeper into how connection to nature, ancestry, different layers of spirituality can become healing resources, and what practices do we have. So there's some aspect always of like some kind of framing or teaching, then there's skill building and practice, there's interactivity, I will also do some demo sessions with some people that would like that, and to go to that we can learn from each other and learn directly from the nervous system. So it's not teaching, just talking about it. It's the life process work that helps us to see some of the aspects that we otherwise learn about theoretically. And I think that's always a great teaching, and we can go through it. Another level of teaching that I think is often underrepresented at our courses are collective healing fields. We do a lot of collective synchronization. The community is a very important part of it, because the interdependence of an individual and the collective is one of the main healing principles. And I think we are transitioning into an era of collective healing. That's why we also call the main theme of the summit and many activities we do the collective healing journey, the collective healing movement. And so I think being part of a powerful collective that becomes a healing field in which we all can have our individual insights and learnings, but also develop we capacities that are important and that we can take into any kind of places where we work or where we live or where we are impacting our environment. So it's definitely an ecosystemic approach. And we will also, of course, introduce some of the powerful spiritual practices that that we are working with that can help us a lot as resources and agencies in the deeper trauma work. And I think that's why it's also going to be interesting for every one of us personally, ancestrally, and collectively. And it's going to be interesting for everybody who works professional with clients. So on all levels, I think it's a very interesting and powerful experience.
Yeah, I absolutely echo that. And thank you, Thomas. I think we're coming towards the end of our call now. So huge thanks and deep gratitude to you, Thomas, for sharing and providing so much wisdom and experience and grounded, embodied experience that you always transmit in anything you say and do. So thank you, Thomas, for that. Thank you, Anna, my co-host, for your presence and for bringing the questions and your wisdom through those. And I'd like to thank everyone on our call today for listening and participating through your presence. And as Thomas just said, we really try to build a collective field, and that in a way starts now. So the fact that you're here is also part of building our collective field, and your presence is important, and we want to thank you for that. And again, invite you to join us if you feel called for the upcoming course, the Spiritual Healing Journey, which starts on November 18th. So as we've said, it's the next step in our toolkit in the collective healing movement, another level, if you like, of skill building within the healing movement. And to learn more about that, you can visit the website spiritualhealingjourneycourse.com. And just to give you a little bit of data about what's really in the program itself, it's 5 months of online interactive teaching, including Q&A with Thomas, as well as guest speaker sessions, including people from indigenous traditions, access to all the course materials, including video, audio, transcript, graphic recordings. They're always beautiful from every course session. We have a very skilled graphic artist who does graphic recordings from all the sessions. There will also be an online community platform so that you can connect and share about your experiences and learning. And if you're coming, particularly if you're coming kind of new into this field, you will also receive, as part of your registration, 2 6-part recorded teachings to introduce you to the concepts that will be discussed in the course and that underpin the course. One on understanding collective trauma and another one on fundamental mystical principles of healing. There'll also be 3 guided meditations, 11 talks specific to spiritual healing that have been gleaned from the last 5 years of the Collective Trauma Summits. So all in all, over 50 hours of teachings in the course. So we very much intend, as we've spoken about today, to invite and invoke a really deep and rich and transformative experience. So if that is of interest to you, we warmly invite you to join us, the Spiritual Healing Journey course. To learn more, please do visit the website, spiritualhealingjourneycourse.com. We'll put that link into the chat now. And you can also check your inbox for an email from us with your link to learn more about the course. So thank you again, Thomas. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody, for your presence, for your questions, for your curiosity in showing up today. And we very much look forward to seeing you in the future if that calls to you on the course. And bye-bye for now. Go well until we meet again.